to Healthy Living Together, a wellness project developed by McKenzie Health System in collaboration with Sanilac County Health Department, MSU Extension, Sanilac County Great Start Collaborative, Sanilac County CMH, and it's meant to help you on your path to a healthier life. And since April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, our presentation today will be on child abuse prevention, more specifically on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and their potential effects throughout a child's lifetime. A few housekeeping items. Everybody is automatically muted, so therefore, if you have a question, we ask that you use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat. And also know that the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. And the event is being recorded, and a link will be emailed to you following the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce myself and our speaker. I am Megan Mason, an RN with Sanilac County Health Department, and I work in public health. Our speaker today is Stephanie MacMillan. Stephanie is the program coordinator for the Sanilac County Child Abuse Prevention Council. She's been in this position since July of 2021. Stephanie is Michigan ACEs Community Champion, meaning that she's been trained on ACEs community education. She also serves on the PEC school board. She has a 14-year-old son and 7-year-old daughter, and her passion for children and the eagerness to make a difference in their lives shines through in her personality every day. Thank you for joining us, Stephanie. I'm eager to hear your presentation today.
Oh, thank you so much. As Megan said, my name is Stephanie MacMillan. I work at the Sanilac County Child Advocacy Center as the program coordinator. My training for the Michigan ACEs initiative was part of basically the goal, in short, is helping communities become more trauma informed. So I'm excited to share this information with everyone today. So let's get started.
I am unable to share my screen. It's been disabled.
Oh. Oh, there we go. I can see it now, Megan. But it is small. I don't know if it's small for everyone. Oh, there we go. So we are, the next slide, please. So I'm going to start by asking a question. What if one of the largest public health discoveries of our time is about the smallest of us? So from the first spark of life as cells divide and form a tiny beating heart, a fragile skeletal structure, a central nervous system, the experience of being in a relationship with another person and with the world around us has profound impacts on who we are and who we will become. Although we can recall and describe with words much of what's happening in our lives, the memory of human experience is stored in our bodies, not just our minds. I'm going to share with you findings from the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. We'll call it the ACE study. That's how it's commonly known. The ACE study confirms with scientific evidence that adversity early in life increases physical, mental, and behavioral problems later in life. The ACE study is the largest study of its kind, with over 17,000 participants. It was developed and co-sponsored by Kaiser Permanente of San Diego, California, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, in the early 90s. Dr. Vincent Folletti and Dr. Rob Anda are the co-principal investigators of the ACE study. Dr. Anda, who designed the ACE study while he was working as a senior scientist at the CDC, reviewed and approved all the information from the study that I'll report to you today. Before I introduce the ACE study, I want to explain a little bit about brain development. The human central nervous system connects us to ourselves, to other people, and to the world around us. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord that integrate all of our senses and information from receptors located throughout the human body. It regulates internal body functions and manages elaborate chemical and electrical signaling. The nervous system considers sensory input in the context of each and every second almost instantaneously and determines our understanding of and response to the world we live in. Cells in the nervous system are called neurons. Excuse me. They are stunningly effective at processing and transmitting information, and they have a central purpose in doing so, to adapt in ways that keep us alive. Dr. Martin Teicher of Harvard University reviewed and approved all of the brain science facts in this presentation. Next slide, please. On the far left, we see a set of brain cells or neurons and what they might look like at the time of birth. There aren't many connections between these cells at birth. Babies are born with only the connections and brain functions they need at that point in life. Most of the wiring of our brains occurs as a result of life experience from our senses. By age 6, those same brain cells now have many connections. The wiring of the brain or the making of complex neural networks is experience dependent. What gets experienced the most tends to lead to more robust connections between nerve cells and form networks. This is a process called branching. The last section of the slide represents age 14, which is also about the time of puberty. Notice that there are now fewer connections between the brain cells than there were at age 6. This is because the least experienced connections tend to withdraw at about the time of puberty. This process is called pruning. This phenomenon helps to explain why neglect or not getting the experiences that we need has such a powerful negative impact on health and social functioning. So every person's life is unique, but for illustration, let's imagine two worlds. One is mean and dangerous, and the second is kind and generous. Traumatic experience during development, like abuse, neglect, chaotic relationships, it generates predictable pattern of brain architecture, behavior, and traits. Humans are only really made to be under stress for about 20 minutes at a time, which is long enough to prepare for fight or to hide. So experiences that cause stress chemicals to be continuously produced, for example, child abuse, neglect, or even being in a war zone, have a big impact on development. Under these circumstances, our bodies tend to prepare for life in a dangerous world. But the downside is when the stress hormones like cortisol hang around for a long time, they are toxic to brain cells. This toxicity includes making it difficult for brain cells to develop healthy neural networks and can even cause brain cells to die. That is why we call continuous stress, trauma, and unpredictable stress toxic stress. Okay, next slide, please. So one common belief in our society is that the people whose experience takes them on the top path are maladaptive, and the people along the bottom path are adaptive. That's very untrue. Both pathways are adaptive. Both brains are adapting to their experience. And that's good for us as a species. The people whose brains adapt to a dangerous or stressful world are more likely to survive when life is tough. The people whose brains adapt to a safe world are likely to be prepared to meet society's expectations in tranquil times. Our experiences get wired into our biology. We can run into trouble when our biology collides with social expectations. If you put a person from the kind and gentle world into the chaotic and turbulent environment of, say, riot control, that person may struggle unless they have learned some very specific skills. Likewise, a child adapted to a dangerous, stressful world may not sustain patience. He or she may not share, cooperate, or use words as a first choice. When that child comes to school and we ask them to sit still, share, cooperate, there can be a very painful disconnect that's hard for everybody. The child will have to be actively taught the skills required to succeed in this context, just as we would train a person from the benevolent path how to act in a chaotic and dangerous environment. I find this really interesting. Note the comparison on like a healthy child brain and then the brain of a child from severe abuse and neglect. Give me a second to look at that. The damaging effects of toxic stress and cortisol hormones released into the bloodstream and brain is very relative to brain functions. So here's a big question. Do environmental effects have to happen anew in each generation, or could they ever be passed down from one generation to the next? Basically, that's the big question of nature versus nurture. So DNA and genes, which is our nature, are a blueprint for development. However, experiences, which would be nurture, play a significant role in human development. So I have a short video that can explain it much better than I can with words. I'm a visual learner, and I think a lot of other people are too. Is it coming up for? Oh, there we go. I can't hear it. Can you hear it, Megan?
I can hear it.
Well, the explanations had a hint of the supernatural about them.
No, I can't.
Can you hear it now?
As the centuries whisked by, science emerged
Now I can.
on a tough battle to gain credibility. Eventually, social science emerged with the popular theory that our environment is what makes us us. Let's call this nurture. Undaunted, the biological sciences presented another theory: genes, an unchangeable blueprint in you from birth, decides everything. Let's call this one nature. So, are we a product of our genes or our environment? The battle raged on. Observations in a newer field of study suggest that both are partly right. This field is called epigenetics. It means above genetics and has to do with how nature and nurture interact. At the heart of this discussion is one simple question asked by researcher Michael Meany: what makes a good rat mother? Well, for a rat mother, nothing says love and care like some nice, vigorous licking. The higher the number of licks, the more love and the better the mama. With this in mind, the researchers compared two groups of rat mothers, one that licked their babies a lot and another that didn't. They found that when babies grew up, they carried their mama's behavior with them and passed it on to the next generation and the next one, and so on. But could it simply be that this particular group of rats was genetically predisposed to produce caring mothers? Well, to test this, the researchers took newborn babies from low-licking mothers and fostered them with high-licking mothers, and vice versa. It turns out that if the mother is a high licker, the rat baby becomes a high licker too, regardless of whether it's genetically related to her or not. So genes really don't have anything to do with it then? In true scientific fashion, the researchers dove right into the brains of these rats to see what, if anything, was different in the brains of the babies of high-licking versus low-licking mothers. When they looked at genes that possibly play a role in motherly care, they found crucial differences. Newborn rat babies have clusters of molecules called methyl groups attached to these genes. These methyl groups silence the gene, effectively switching it off. Researchers discovered that while the methyl groups in rats from low-licking mothers were still attached, in the rats from high-licking mothers, these methyl groups had disappeared. This was also true for the rats that had been adopted by high-licking rat mothers. The care these rats received from their mothers actually physically altered their genetic expression. Now that's all fine and good for rats, but what about people? Well, the same is true for Lucky Lyle and Troubled Tim, and for you and me. The genes you're born with are the genes you've got. But lifestyle and environmental influences such as nutrition, exercise, smoking, stress, and love greatly affect your biology. These changes can actually be observed at the DNA level. The bright side is that epigenetic changes happen throughout our lives, and our choices can make real differences in how we develop as human beings.
Thank you. Now the ACE study. Oops, sorry. And then there we go. So we've been talking about the effects of toxic stress on individuals. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the effects of toxic stress on the population as a whole. We're going to talk about a large scientific study about the enduring effects of adverse childhood experiences. Dr. Rob Anda and Dr. Vincent Folletti are the co-principal investigators of the study, which they call the ACE study. Most prior studies of the health and social effects of childhood abuse focused on a single type of adversity, such as sexual abuse. The ACE study broadened the picture to include multiple types of childhood stressors. In addition, the study measured a wide array of health and social problems. This is how the ACE study expanded the knowledge into a broader public health perspective. So the ACE study is unique because it provides the potential to understand how multiple forms of childhood stressors can affect many important public health problems. The design of the ACE study began in 1991. In 1994, the CDC provided funding to conduct the ACE study at the Department of Preventive Medicine in San Diego. More than 17,000 adult members of the Kaiser Health Insurance Plan completed a survey about adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACEs, health behaviors, disease risks, mental health and substance abuse, and other health and social problems. Their ages ranged from 19 to 94. The study participants were generally well-educated. Most had attended college, and only 6% did not have a high school diploma. They were predominantly white middle-class people who had access to some of the best healthcare in the world. Study participants are still being followed to assess the relationship of ACEs to causes of death, incidence of disease, healthcare utilization, and the use of prescription medications. So this slide shows the 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences that were studied. The first group are indicators of household dysfunction, which include growing up with substance abusing household members, alcohol or drugs, parental separation or divorce, growing up with mentally ill household members or caregivers, witnessing intimate partner violence, specifically having a battered mother, or criminal behavior like having a household member imprisoned. 3 forms of childhood abuse were studied: emotional, physical, and sexual, and 2 forms of neglect were included: emotional and physical. As you can see from the percentages on the slide, ACEs are common in this middle-class, well-educated population. Because adverse childhood experiences are so highly interrelated, it did not make sense to look at how single categories of ACEs influenced health and social problems. Instead, doctors Anda and Folletti developed an ACE score. This score is simply a count of the number of categories of ACEs that each person reported from 0 to 10. Each category counts as 1 point in the ACE score. So if a person experienced physical abuse, no matter how many times or what the severity of the abuse was, the ACE score is 1. If the person experienced physical abuse and had a substance abusing parent, the ACE score is 2, and so forth. Think of the ACE score as a measure of the childhood biological stress dose. As the ACE score goes up, on average, the exposure to exposure to the developmental effects of toxic stress increases. In this illustration, you see that only a third of people in this study had an ACE score of 0, and 16% had scores of 4 or more. Adverse childhood experiences are common and they tend to cluster. ACEs are a hidden burden in the study population. People who report higher ACE scores are more likely to have health and social problems. In fact, as the ACE score goes up, the percentage of people with health and social problems also goes up. All of the data slides from the ACE study that I'll show you today they're formatted in the same way. So along the bottom, the horizontal axis are the ACE scores from 0 on the left to 4 or more on the right. The vertical axis is the percent of people who have the disease or condition. So in this first set of bars, on the far left, we see the percent of people who became regular cigarette smokers by age 12 goes up as each level of the ACE score goes up. In the second set of bars, we see the percent who were smokers as adults also goes up in the stepwise fashion as the score goes up from 0 to 4 or more. And then in the next one, COPD. So ACEs lead to early onset of smoking, which is sustained throughout adulthood and eventually leads to a high risk of smoking-related lung disease. ACEs can result in depression and anxiety. Nicotine can sometimes reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety. So the benefits of nicotine in reducing these unpleasant emotions, it might help to explain why knowledge of health risks due to smoking are not really enough for some people to quit. Now we can begin to anticipate why ACEs are related to certain behaviors and social conditions. Here we see the risk of becoming an alcoholic increases 6-fold from an ACE score of 0 to a score of 6. And ACEs affect relationships. People with higher ACE scores are more likely to marry an alcoholic. Think for a minute about how these indicators have the potential to be transmitted from one generation to the next. Here we see that the risk of depression increases for both men and women in a dose-response fashion as the ACE score goes up. ACEs are held in the body, leading to mental, physical, and behavioral health problems in adulthood. Some of those problems are unintentionally handed to the next generation. Becoming an alcoholic, marrying an alcoholic, and suffering from depression are a part of the intergenerational transmission of adverse childhood experiences. One of the strongest relationships seen in the ACE study is between ACEs and the risk of suicide attempts. People with an ACE score of 4 have almost 20 times the risk of suicide attempts as people with an ACE score of 0. Here's a list of some of the health and social problems documented by ACE study publications. Because ACEs have a powerful impact on many health and social problems, the ACE researchers concluded that ACEs are the leading cause of health and social problems in our nation. And this should lead to thinking about prevention. We are living in a time with stunning potential for shifting the trajectory of health and well-being for generations to come. ACEs are common. ACEs are highly interrelated. ACEs have a cumulative impact that is captured by the ACE score. And people with higher ACE scores are more likely to have multiple health and social problems, some of which increase the odds of their children having high ACE scores as well. The discoveries about the effects of toxic stress on the developing brain provide a biologic plausibility for the ACE study findings. So this information makes a strong case for concluding that the relationship between the ACE score and health problems is definitely a cause and effect relationship. The ACE study provides us with straightforward information about the consequences of toxic stress during childhood. The scientific research gives us powerful information we can use every day to improve health, safety, prosperity, and longevity. But the ACE study isn't a detailed roadmap of services or programs. It is an invitation for us to be pioneers. Through our collective knowledge and action, we are the ones with the power to shift the dynamics within our own families, communities, and society that lead to high ACE scores. When people hear about the ACE study findings, they often ask about resilience. People get excited about the notion of resilience, in part because it reminds us that our supportive actions matter. Our desire for resilience leads naturally to a search for ways to help families and communities. What do we know about individuals who do well despite adversity? We know that the 3 protective systems are nested. People do best when they are living in thriving families and communities. We can help one another to develop personal attributes that help us all weather life's storms. Some examples of individual capabilities would be like a positive view. Lets yourself know that you're important and valuable and that you can ask help when you need it. Self-efficacy, self-regulation. While there certainly are individual capabilities that are associated with recovery and resilience, these are often the same capabilities that do not develop well when experiencing toxic stress. So believing that people could just try harder to be what their biological adaptations keeps them from being is a very circular logic that's not very helpful. The second protective system we can nurture is belonging. Many people talk about the importance of people in their lives, people who recognize and encourage our unique talents, interests, and strengths. Relationships that provide security and belonging will become the norm as we learn and improve our skills and competencies to be relevant and helpful during times of stress and challenge, as well as during celebration and rest. If we've decided to dramatically improve health and safety for this generation and future generations, we must foster thriving communities. Fostering thriving communities is about empowerment. It's about investing in the people who have the most at stake so they can be expert leaders in their own community's change. Supporting healthy community processes that respect cultural traditions and values is a high leverage activity. For example, just as a rising tide lifts all boats, a high capacity community lifts all beings. People living in high capacity communities are less likely to have high adverse childhood experience scores, less drug and alcohol abuse, less depression and serious and persistent mental illness, and fewer problems in school and work. Change is up to us. It is shaped by our thoughts, our conversations, the way we relate with one another in relationships, in families, and in communities. As we work to prevent the accumulation of ACEs, let's keep in mind that we don't have to get to an ACE scores of 0. Bringing scores down any amount will have huge effects. We might not be able to prevent the first ACE from occurring in a family, but we certainly can notice when children have 5 ACEs and make sure that number doesn't shoot up to 10. Our action to prevent ACEs, whether large or small, can profoundly improve our future. Thank you so much. Here's my contact information. I think this is where we do the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. That was full of really good information. That was really interesting, especially your statistics, I thought. Like,
Sorry, I hope it didn't go too fast.
I didn't think so. We did get a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first one was, what is the Child Advocacy Center and what do they do?
Oh, that's a really great question. So our first umbrella is our Child Abuse Prevention Council. And under that, we have intervention and prevention. So intervention would be our Child Advocacy Center. And what that is we get referrals for children that have been sexually abused or severely physically abused. And they come into our family child-oriented facility. And we have what is called a forensic interviewer. And what they do is they take the child and they talk with them one-on-one and they get the entire story and all the details of the abuse from beginning to end. And while that's happening down in our conference room, we have our entire multidisciplinary team that is watching it live. So there you're going to have prosecution, DHS, law enforcement, community mental health. And basically the point of that is so that the child only has to tell their story one time, because before child advocacy centers existed, the child had to tell their story multiple times to multiple people. And each time they do that, it can re-traumatize them. And then after the interview is over, we as an agency support them in any way we can and help them get the supports that they need. We have a victim advocate that will help with the court process, just follow-ups, making sure the family has all of the support that they need. And then on our prevention end, the baby pantry falls under us. So we have that service that we offer. We also do a youth empowerment camp every year. We educate the community. We will be getting back into schools shortly. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
When is your youth camp?
Oh yes, registration is open for that. And it is June 13th, which is a Tuesday. So it's a little earlier than normal this year. It's going to be like a kickoff to summer. You can find that on our Facebook page. You can sign up. It is for youth ages 9 to 13.
Cool. Okay. And then one other question. How many kids have you seen in Sanilac County within the last year?
Okay, that's a great question. So last year in 2022, we had 112 kiddos come through our agency. A majority of those were for sexual abuse or sexually abusive material. 97% of our children, they knew their perpetrator. So, yeah.
Okay. And that is it for questions. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And thank you all for attending. We would invite you to please join us again next month. It's May 17th. It's going to be at Diamond Trail. This one will be in person. We do ask that you register, especially since it is outdoors. We can contact you if there's inclement weather. But the next one will be outdoor cooking class and container gardening. I believe it's at noon on May 17th. Okay. All right. Thanks again. And everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you.